But that is often the excuse we hear. If you are hearing that as a parent, that is illegal for them to say.
The whole point of having an IEP for a child is that they are successfully supported to the maximum extent possible with typical peers. That's the law. That's the bottom line.
Welcome to Love is a Classroom, Stories of Inclusion, a podcast about creating high-quality, meaningful, inclusive experiences for children with and without disabilities. In each series, I share the stories of teams that come together through love to create high-quality, meaningful, inclusive experiences for children and families. Today, I'm here with
Vicky Brett, and I am a special education attorney, and Amanda, my business partner, who will introduce herself very shortly, and I have a nonprofit called the Inclusive Education Project.
Hi, I'm Amanda Selogie, and our nonprofit, the Inclusive Education Project, serves two main purposes. One, providing direct pro bono and low-cost legal services for students living with disabilities or special needs within the education system, educating and training parents, the general public, schools, service providers, you name it, anyone working with this population of kiddos on best practices, how to best create an inclusive learning environment, legal obligations. And we do that through trainings in our podcasts and really eat, sleep, breathe special education.
Navee's world is not just about Navee. It's about creating a community where every person is and feels loved. However, the future holds uncertainties. As Navee grows and learns, she needs additional classroom supports. How will she get those supports? Is funding or a shortage of qualified staff the issue? Do teachers have the time and resources to provide her and her peers without disabilities a quality education? If something's not right, do Brooke and the Walker family need a lawyer and an advocate? These were the questions confronted in Series 2, and many families, educators, and administrators across the country and world are asking the same questions about their children. To explore these challenges, find guidance, and explore possibilities, I've invited Vicky and Amanda on the podcast for a focused episode on inclusion and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act of 2004, or IDEA. The conversation is based on Series 2. If you didn't listen to the 5 episodes, I encourage you to go back and listen to them. Let's get started. Welcome, Amanda and Vicky. Can you tell us a little bit about how you became civil rights lawyers and advocates for the inclusion of children with disabilities?
Sure. I actually thought I was going to go into teaching special education, following in my aunt's footsteps. And so I have a degree in child and adolescent development, and I worked at a full inclusion charter school while I was in college as a behavioral aide for kids on IEPs. And it was one of those 1 in a million amazing schools where full inclusion was done so well that it was not only successful and embraced by our kiddos with challenge needs, but also the general population. And I quickly found out more about the red tape and the challenges and the struggles of not just parents of these children, but also the teachers and really everyone trying to work to have a more inclusive environment in the public school setting. And I'd always been told to go to law school, and this kind of brought those two worlds together for me. And so I quickly pivoted and decided to go to law school to do this area of law. And very fortunate enough that I went to law school to really embark on this journey and fell in love with it and our clients and our work. And that's where I met Vicky in law school. And shortly after we started our careers, we decided to really jump in feet first and create our own practice.
And I had a different route to special education law when I went to law school. The only thing I knew about special education was through my adopted cousin who had autism and had seen his struggles in the school settings. I had gone to law school. I met Amanda. I was going to my 3rd year. She was going into her 2nd year. And we had both studied abroad in Spain. And so to try to get a class together, she had talked about how she was joining the special education clinic. And I thought, oh, that seems fun. Yeah, I'll do that. I need a couple extra units. Let's do it. But I really fell in love with this area of the law that I had no idea had existed. I started at a small boutique law firm, did special education law, and then a little bit of family law. She graduated, then started at a firm, and we'd always get together and talk about our cases and how we would do things differently, And I was an attorney about 2 years, and she'd been an attorney for about a year. And that, as they say, is our history of how we were able to come together and create this wonderful organization that we have.
That's incredible. I admire the work that you've done. I brought you on because there were legal concerns in series number 2. Brooke, the mother of Navee, experienced great inclusive education with Miss Onifray, who's in episode 2, with Miss Anderson in first grade. But in first grade, Brooke started to realize that Navee was not developing the literacy skills. She's not only deaf, but she also has language deprivation. According to the curriculum that Brooke has been introduced to, Navee should be receiving services from the teacher of the deaf for 2 hours every single day, and that's not being provided. There's no question that inclusion is incredibly important, not just for Navee, but all the kids who are in Miss Onifray's class and all the kids who are in Miss Anderson's class, and most likely all the kids who will be in her future classes. But in order to do that, she needs to have the right supports. What can they use to leverage the legal policies in order to help Navee receive the appropriate amount of time from the teacher of the deaf?
I think it's important for people to understand that the idea behind the IDEA was really to educate those students that have unique learning challenges and needs so that they can become productive members of society. That is the idea. And so many people get caught up in either the state laws that try to guide people through the federal law. But at the end of the day, the premise is that these children should have a free and appropriate public education. Brooke's story is very similar to a lot of parents that we encounter every day in our legal practice, in that they either have a gut feeling that something is off, or they know their child is suffering and is not even being provided any types of services, let alone appropriate services. This idea was created in the 70s. So it's really not even that old. Over the last almost 50 years of the IDEA, we have seen how each state presents what they value in providing an education to all children, and then this special sector of special education. And I think that is really hard for a lot of parents to navigate. They shouldn't have to learn this whole other language. But I felt that from Brooke was that she felt like she had to learn about the law, and that really is not the premise of the law.
Yeah. And so when the IDEA was created by Congress, there were 2 premises. One was that this is a promise between essentially the federal and state governments and the schools that we will fund your special education, but in exchange, you must then follow these laws, these set of rules, and you have obligations to students by receiving these funds. The second kind of premise that Congress laid out was that the system should be effectually easy to navigate so that parents themselves can advocate for themselves, that they shouldn't need the assistance of an attorney or an advocate in order to advocate for their child, ask for services, enforce an IEP. Those were the 2 premises. It's happened in effect over the last 50 years through states doing things a little bit differently. Each school district, there not really being as much enforcement as need be, is that there's a lot to special education that's gotten convoluted and lost, and we're interpreting a law and we're asking teachers to interpret a law. They're not lawyers. And school districts have hired lawyers to represent them, which basically causes parents to have to get attorneys to represent themselves. So we've lost that modality of it, which is one of those problems. But in the law, the rights are held onto by the parents and the children. So the educational rights that children have to a free, appropriate public education are there. The districts hold obligations to support these students, but the enforcement comes, unfortunately, through the legal system, through the courts, the way the system has been set up. There's not as many checks and balances from the Department of Education as we would like. But when it all bottles down to what should a teacher be providing, what should a school district offer to a family, what is Brooke entitled to, it's supposed to come down to individualized education. We have the individualized education plan, the IEP. It all should be individualized to what does this child specifically need based on their abilities, their unique needs, and their unique circumstances, all the things that surround them where they are. And so if a student requires specialized intervention, whether it be specific one-on-one direct service by a specific type of therapist or provider, that's supposed to be considered and provided. But we've come into this system where too much deference has been placed on the special education team and many times district administrators rather than the actual providers themselves to say, hey, wait a minute, intuitively, my gut is telling me that this child needs X, Y, and Z service.
So you mentioned that it would be funded by the federal government. And in Brooke's situation and the team's situation that's discussed in series 2, there is a federal grant to pay for a teacher of the deaf. And so money is not the issue that they're dealing with, or at least that's the understanding right now. That's not the case for every family out there. And I know one of the biggest reasons that teachers and special education service providers and general ed teachers, they'll say, yes, that would be great, but we don't have the funding. Is there funding out there that folks aren't aware of to get those services that are deemed appropriate for that child?
There is case law that indicates, and within the law itself, funding should not be the number one problem. We hear that so often, whether it's the district administrators kind of mincing words and it's just the quickest way to be like, oh, we don't have any money for that. Or what they really truly mean is, for example, if they are in a very rural area, it is difficult to get somebody at whatever they believe the salary should be at, right? One of Amanda's cases had experienced not being able to hire a specific type of vision impaired teacher, somebody that could teach Braille. There was like nobody. And we're in a very populated region, right? But that is often the excuse we hear. If you are hearing that as a parent, that is illegal for them to say. They cannot say, we don't have the money for it.
And not only is it not legal for them to say, it's just not accurate information. School districts are public entities. They are part of the state and federal government. If you go to a school board meeting, you have a right to request this type of information about budgets, about where the money is spent. You can specifically request if you want to know how much money is being spent on this or that. And the reality is that the money is there. When you look at the overall general big bucket of the funds that come in from the state governments, from the federal governments, through regular funding, through grant funding, X, Y, and Z, the pool of money is there. What's supposed to happen is that the funding specifically set aside for special education is only supposed to be spent on special education, nothing else. What often happens, and what these administrators have realized, is that if we say no to parents and we say, oh, we don't have the money for that, or, oh, we don't think that's appropriate for your child, or your child doesn't need that. If they say no, that money doesn't go back to the federal government, doesn't go back to the state government, it sits in their budget. And then what happens is it can be pooled in with the general funding, and that money can be used for other things. And so we see school districts where they might say, oh, we don't have the funding to have a deaf or hard of hearing specialist at our district. We just can't afford that salary when we only have 5 students that need it. But then they go and spend $100,000 on revamping the football field. And you think there's a disconnect here on, is it that we don't have money, or are we using it in the wrong places?
And that brings in the question of what are the priorities of the school district? How can we ensure as advocates, as Brooke, as myself, as Miss Onifray, as Miss Rochelle in the first series, what can we do to help ensure or support that family and encourage the district? We're in this compromising position where we could lose our jobs. What do you recommend as lawyers? Where are the boundaries for teachers? Where are the boundaries for families?
My entire dad's side of the family are all educators, teachers, administrators. And so when they found out that I was going to special education law, we're just like, what? Like, you're going to be, and I was just like, I'm trying to help you, right? At the end of the day. And I understand, and we've seen it. We've had teachers just slide our card across the desk for the parent to just call us and don't say you got this from me. Teachers do walk a fine line. And if they are in a school district or under an administrator that is very retaliatory, then I would advise just don't get in our way. And I say that with all due respect because we'll have a teacher that kind of gives the parent all this information about their child and what they can do and what they can say and how they can ask. And that's wonderful. And it's so helpful for us. But then when we bring it to the IEP team, I'd rather you just be quiet, right? But when we turn the conversation to the teacher, or if the administrators turn the conversation to the teacher, and then the teacher says the complete opposite and essentially undoes the request that the parent and Amanda or I have brought to the team, it completely deteriorates
Yeah.
everything. I think it's different when we can have a conversation and the teacher can say things without really taking a side. I think that when teachers are able to let us know that they need help, that's wonderful. And then there are certainly those teachers that speak very freely and really do indicate, yes, we actually do need an aid in this classroom because I have 25 other students that I cannot leave if your child elopes, right? There's a spectrum, but please just don't try to undo the work that we're trying to
Yeah.
do.
The best power you can give parents is information. If you can have conversations and be open with parents, even if it's verbally, like email is obviously better, but if it's not, if you're able to give that information, that detail to the parents and empower them to act, it can go a long way because we see some teachers who are afraid, they don't say anything to the families. They shut off communication or they're silent, and then the family doesn't get any information. That's hurtful because then the family can't even do anything. They don't even know what they can do. But then on the other side, it creates this us versus them, this we're not in this together mentality. But in reality, parents hold so much power. And I talked before about the school board and the school being a public entity. The school board can do a lot, can make a lot of changes. And the most powerful thing a parent can do is going to a school board meeting, bringing as many parents as they can that are in their similar positions, talking together, working together to put pressure on the school board to make changes. Because we can get involved and we can file for due process or we can advocate at an IEP meeting and we can get this one thing for this one child, but it's not going to make a systemic change in that school district. But parents collectively can get together. And when you look at like special education in general and like disability rights in general, grassroots movements of disabled people and parents and family members, the feet on the ground is how change has happened. It hasn't been from just attorneys advocating and filing lawsuits. So if teachers hold that power to empower those parents to be like, look, you can go to the school board. The school board has power. The school board can change. If this principal is unwilling to do X, Y, and Z, go above their heads. I'm not trying to say we want to undermine the school team, but when we have situations where we're at a stalemate, where we feel like things aren't happening, that is the next logical step. And parents are often afraid to do that. But if they can get that encouragement from the teachers, even if it's off the record, it really can go a long way. This teacher isn't going to get in my way. This teacher has my back, even if they're not saying anything. I know that I'm not crazy. I've got someone else who agrees with me.
When we're talking about rural school districts and even larger school districts like where you're at, there is that lack of qualified individuals. What if there isn't the legal support in a community, if there isn't a teacher of the deaf in the community, if there isn't, for whatever reason, occupational therapists in that community, it's so small. Is it really the families need to come together? And if it's a small school district, it might just be maybe 2 or 3 families coming together and pushing the school board and saying, this is what we need to do. Because I know a lot of school districts and a lot of families, they struggle
Yeah.
with getting qualified individuals. So what's your advice on that?
So we have the federal Department of Education, then we have the state Department of Education. And then school districts are local educational agencies. Often when we have SELPA, special education local planning area, but those organizations kind of govern multiple school districts. So LAUSD, one of the largest school districts in the country, they're their own SELPA, but other areas where you have a bunch of small school districts near each other, or even in rural parts not near each other, those SELPAs are designed to assist. These school districts are not always obligated to act on them on their own. They can go to their county department of education. What we see when it happens and it's done correctly is that if they need that deaf and hard of hearing teacher for one child and it doesn't make sense that they can't find that person, they can go to these other school districts in conjunction, work together, go to their SELPA, go to their county department of education, their state department of education to say, look, this is the need, right? And the school district has an obligation. If it's determined in the IEP that this child needs this service, they have an obligation to make it work. If you're not going to necessarily have someone who is a specialist because there's literally no one within a 200-mile radius, maybe we're being creative and we're looking at consultation time. And in this time of Zoom, it's possible for us to consult with people across the world, let alone across the country, to get specialists, to get expertise in things, to train and supervise and consult in areas that maybe some teachers are just, it's not their expertise. So there's ways around it. It should never be we put the job posting up and there's no one in our area, so we just can't do anything. That should not be the end of the road.
One of the things that is talked about in the second series is when Wendy Bowman came in, she taught the entire class sign language. And so that interpreter served as a cultural bridge because there were dual language learners. And when we bring in different specialists, it provides that community and it switches over from that medical model lens to that social model lens where it's a collective unit that's working toward everybody advancing in their education rather than we're going to focus just on Navee and her services for the teacher of the deaf. Miss Anderson talks about co-teaching as a strategy for that social model so that you don't have children being pulled out for services. Do you have ideas on rethinking this continuum of services where it looks more like a social model where every child feels they belong?
Yeah, I think going back to the first thing that I had said in what is even the purpose of the IDEA, right? And it's to provide the supports and services for the child so that they become productive members of society. If the goal of the IEP team is to merely try to have the child be at grade level, then you are going to see a child with Down syndrome, and you are automatically, with that perspective, with that end goal, going to be like, oh, because of the intellectual disability, they might as well just be in a special day class. We're going to try to put them in a general education classroom. And I think that is the end goal shouldn't be to just pass these academic goals and bring that child up to grade level, because we have society where so many different people are at so many different levels. And so often I hear parents say this role is just not created for my child. And it really starts in that classroom setting. So when we get involved, we are that bridge of where we have to have everybody take a step back and really understand what are the expectations? What are parents' expectations? Maybe they don't want to ever have their child be at grade level. Maybe they just want to focus on the social emotional aspects of their child, and that's okay. But when you have a teacher that's like, no, we have to follow the goals, we can change the goals. IEP teams, and this is something that I hope people understand, not just parents, but administrators and teachers, you have so much power. You could literally do anything. I think that so many of them are just, they have these chains because this is the way we did it with the Down syndrome kid that we had 5 years ago. This is the way that we do it with autism kids like this. And it's individualized. So it could just be for this child, but we can have a model where they're in the classroom 80% of the time, and then maybe they're pulled out or in the same classroom. There's so many ideas out there. And so I would want everybody to take a step back and really realize what is our actual goal here. Because if our goal is to get at grade level, then we may need more specialized academic instruction that can only be provided in a pull-out method. But maybe the goal is the child have a good experience at school. That was a client of mine recently where he stopped enjoying going to school because the
Yeah.
teacher just saw all of his behaviors and his tics as defiance. And it was really the teacher not understanding he cannot physically control his tics. So the expectations of parent just saying, I just want him to enjoy coming to school, and the teacher's expectation of, no, this is how a fifth grade boy should act in this classroom, we're completely missing it. So that's something just at higher level that I would want people to try to understand.
Yeah, and to that point, we have so much divisiveness in this country and across the world, and such a lack of understanding and empathy for each other. And when we look at the older generations and the younger generations and where they learned this, it comes from parents, right? But it also comes from schools. And the one thing that I really learned early on when I was working at that full inclusion school was that we can teach very young children to not think differently of children. Like, it starts so young. So the school had preschoolers, and from a very early age, from 3 years old, these kids were included with all different types of children that learn different, that look different. And by the time they got to fifth grade, they didn't see them as different. They were all just peers. And it was so beautiful to see their relationships and the way they saw the world versus I've been to other elementary schools where it's so different, where our kiddos that we represent are treated so poorly and bullied. And if we can create an environment that at an early age, kids are being taught to care for each other and to consider each other and be inclusive and have empathy, what a different world we're going to have when those children get older. School plays such an important role in the development of children, not just reading, writing, and arithmetic, but looking at the bigger picture of how are we teaching these kids to be members of society later on.
And that's my push for early, everywhere, and always. I've heard a lot about, inclusion is a great ideal, but every other child loses out. Like, it is just the biggest detriment to me trying to be a teacher. It interferes with everyone else's learning. And the family is saying, yes, but we want our child included. Where's that line for that elementary school or middle school teacher? What do you have to say to them when they're saying, we just can't do this? It's just ruining it for every other kid.
Yeah, we get that a lot. I hear two things. I hear fear, and I hear that they don't think they can do it. When that fear takes over, it's very easy to just shut down and just say, this can't be done. And it's the expectations. A little bit of what I had talked about before is that teachers' expectations. They have a duty to the other children in the classroom, but the responsibility we don't want completely on that teacher. That's where the extra supports and services need to come into play, so that teacher's fear, that teacher's expectations are appropriately managed. It's so heartbreaking when a parent is just, I don't want my kid to feel othered. And the first person that's othering them is the teacher. And it goes to what Amanda was saying, is that it's quite the opposite. It is not a detriment to other students. In fact, it will broaden their horizons that, hey, not everybody looks the same way as me. Not everybody acts the same way as me. And to build that empathy early on, I would imagine, like, even in middle school, it's more imperative because, yes, there is that switch that even smaller children, 3, 4 years old, they start to categorize the world and they can see that somebody is different. And if we don't have adults that are able to explain to them, it's okay to be different, this child just needs some extra support, because that teacher in and of themselves don't even believe that, then that's where I think we get a lot of the butting heads. So I would say to that teacher, I hear you. What is your expectation for this child to be in your class? If it is an unrealistic expectation where you think that they should be there and be quiet, then that's going to be a problem. But why don't we work together to find a solution that makes you feel comfortable, that makes the family feel comfortable, and that makes the child feel comfortable.
Yeah, I think the research is there that the other children are not harmed, especially if we're using IEPs properly. The whole point of having an IEP for a child is that they are successfully supported to the maximum extent possible with typical peers. That's the law. That's the bottom line. That's like the basic premise of the law. So if the assumptions that are being made, and I say assumptions because by saying the other children are going to be harmed, that is an assumption.
Mm.
And while that does sometimes happen, it's not because that child is in your classroom. It's because that child is not appropriately supported in your classroom, and that your classroom is not appropriately supported, whether it be by not having the right consultation by related service providers, by not having extra support. When we talk about inclusion for children with special needs, we're not just saying, let's just drop them in just to drop them in. There should be a lot of consultation and collaboration with special education team members. And when we talked earlier about wanting to make sure that we have collaboration and not a separation between special education and general education, and really bringing them together, when done correctly, there's so much magic that can happen. And I really say this from my own experience. Like I go to IEP meetings sometimes and I'm told we can't do this. And I say, I have done it. I have been in a classroom where I've seen it. If you don't think it can happen, it just means that I think we need more help or we need more support. And so I think it's getting back to that of we can do so much more if we're willing to make a little bit more effort.
Thank you so much, Amanda and Vicky, for joining me and sharing this with the audience. How can individuals contact you? And if they want a lawyer, do you have any guidance for them?
Yes, they can find us on our website, inclusiveeducationproject.org, on social media. Inclusive Education Project is our handle. Our podcast is anywhere you find your podcast. They can also email us, admin@california.org. We have ways in which people can reach out to us, whether they're community members or schools, and they just have questions or want help. If a family feels like they need legal consultation, we are only licensed to practice in California, but we do have a support network of attorneys in other states. So feel free to reach out to us. The biggest takeaway is if you feel that something in your gut is not right, we always recommend at least consulting with an attorney to see, how you might be able to get help.
Thank you so much, Amanda and Vicky.
Thank you for having us.
Funding, training, and the availability of staff are not the reasons many children with disabilities are not educated alongside their peers without disabilities. It's fear, and what Miss Onifray and Miss Anderson talked about in Series 2, Classroom and School Culture. If there's one takeaway I want listeners to have from this episode in Series 2, it is Navee's world is a world of love. I saw a great quote from the disabilities rights advocate, Sandra McClooey. I want to share it before I sign off on this series. She said, "I dream of the day there are no special classes and services. Then we won't need the term full inclusion anymore. It will just be school." Thank you for listening to Love is a Classroom, Stories of Inclusion. Please subscribe to the podcast, post a review, and share our episodes. You can follow us on Love is a Classroom on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. If you're a teacher, parent, or advocate who would like to share your story, please go to loveisaclassroom.com. Click on Contact and share a brief summary of your experience. Until next time, choose love, choose inclusion.